Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If we can find our seats, please. I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. We have a very nice turnout, and that's probably because this is a matter that really means a lot to us here in the town of Surfside. I want to thank everybody who came out for this. There's been a lot of changes in the legislation that affect, all the condo owners. This change came about primarily because of what happened here in town, and it hits close to home here. So, we appreciate that everybody's here, and the senators and everybody who's here. I just want to give a quick introduction. We have joining us Senator Pizzo, who is currently our district senator. Not for very long. I feel like he came here a little while ago to say goodbye, but you're here all the time. So even though he won't be joining us, he still comes out here whenever we need, and he's joined us for so many different items. So we appreciate that, his dedication to our town. Even though he's being redistricted, it doesn't mean his work's done. So thanks for coming out. We have Senator Jennifer Bradley, who again is, District 5, I believe, and that's all the way north. But again, this is something that matters to her, and we're all constituents in the state of Florida, so we appreciate you coming down for that. We have Surfside building official James McGinnis, who nobody knows more about the buildings here than him. We have on the line with us is Alan Kilsheimer, who is the structural engineer at KCE. He's obviously been investigating the Champlain Tower South, and he's been helping a lot of the buildings go through their inspections. We have Clara Diaz-Leal, who's the market president of Bank United, and Milton Price, who is the HOA lending specialist with Bank United as well. So with this, before we turn it over, I just want to, thank the town and the commission for bringing this forward. And I want to give a special recognition and to Commissioner Maischeid, who's been working on this project for weeks to make sure that this comes out. This was her pet project, and she's been very, very involved in this from the get-go. So if you don't mind, if you'd just say a few words, and then we can continue with the program. Thank you. Sorry, just before moving forward, there are some sheets in the front. If you have any questions that you want to ask, it could be read. You could put up your hands, and we'll call on you as well as we're moving forward.
As I was sitting at the one-year anniversary for the Champlain Towers, I was just thinking how this can never happen again. So I'm happy to have been able to move this discussion in public forum forward, because I think I am the only commissioner that does live in a condo, and we're going through our 50th year right now, and it certainly pertains to a lot of the condos here in Surfside. So I hope this will be a great educational process for everyone, and something that we can all take back and work on so this can never happen again. Thank you.
Yeah, and for those that don't read next door, I'm Shlomo Danziger, Mayor of Surfside. Thank you.
Let's get started. So we've had a few months since the bill has passed and now signed into law. So just a couple of sort of introductory comments. Things can get very nuanced up in Tallahassee, and things don't necessarily translate well or efficiently sometimes back home. Typically the problem is people forget why they're supposed to be there. In this case, we really remembered why we're supposed to be there. And I think now that some of you have digested the actual language of the bill or other people's interpretation of the bill and the new law has probably caused some concern. So a couple of opening statements and assurances to all of you. The law is not static. This is not a finished and final product. We went for so many years, really about a generation and a half of nothing. And so it's a lot of go slow, hurry up. And what I would characterize as a tough love measure. Obviously has some issues that need to be tweaked, some things that seem to be impractical and impossible for performance from a board perspective or from a resident perspective, is well heeded and well received. There are 40 state senators in the state of Florida. There are 120 representatives. I am the only senator who lives with wife and children in a condominium in Sunny Isles. I filed condo bills for several years as it relates to transparency of records, the back and forth between management and the residents, just trying to see transparency. I am a former homicide prosecutor here in Miami-Dade County. I've dealt with a lot of fraud cases and very familiar and my draft of bills came out of and gleaned out of the Miami-Dade grand jury report about rampant fraud and corruption in the whole condo system. So I'm very well versed in these issues. And because we are objectively and practically in a hyper-polarized, hyper-partisan environment, and I'm a Democrat, you don't get to champion and have pride of authorship. But if you don't, you can get a lot done. To my left is one of the smartest, brightest, warmest, nicest, toughest people you will ever meet. And she does it with absolute subtlety. She drove down here several hundred miles to be here. This will be one of 2 town halls we're doing today. Senator Bradley to my left, who's also my seatmate sitting to my left on the Senate floor. No condo, I think she has 1 condo in her district. But she took this on like it was an organic, authentic passion of her own. She saw and felt the pain of many of our residents. She's made separate visits here unannounced and without optics and spectacle. And she is really learned on this issue and dove right into it. She is an attorney by trade. And so the final comment is this. Nothing that we did in Tallahassee was meant just roughshod and haphazard cause any displacement or for people to lose their homes. And I know you have running concerns as well that attach to it about fiscal responsibility, perhaps, of who you have in your existing management or you have in your existing board. We're sensitive and understand all of those issues. Today is a listening sort of town hall, now that the language has come out, and this is where you fire away questions. I'm also, so is Senator Bradley, acutely aware that you may want to ask me things not in public. That's perfectly fine. Before you leave here, get my cell phone number. You can call me or text me anytime and I'll respond. I live 1.5 miles away. Okay? So, Mayor did sort of introductions by title, but I'd like to get a little bit more into what everybody does. Price, you want to start? We're meeting for the first time today.
Right.
No, seriously, I mean, be clear.
So my name is Milton Price. Before I introduce myself, I just want to take the time to wish my deepest condolences to the family and friends who died tragically in Champlain Towers South. I know it's been over a year, but I'm sure it affects you guys every single day. I can't even imagine what you guys went through having you here. But good news is, hopefully, that will lead to that not to ever happen. So, like I mentioned, my name is Price. I am a business banker, HOA specialist at Bank United. I've been with Bank United. Before Bank United, I attended Florida State University. My Go Seminoles. That's right. I received my degree in finance. In terms of my personal background, I was born in Maracaibo, Venezuela. Yo hablo español. Lo hablo bien, pero necesito práctica. And dealing with a lot of the HOAs and businesses here in Florida, you have to, of course, that's one of the benefits that I have once I walk in through. In reference to the type of loans that I do commercial real estate, lines of credits, and of course, HOA lending. I focus on the HOA. For the last 3 to 4 years, I dealt with condominiums from 1,000 units, less than 50. The goal is always the same, to provide top-notch customer service, to understand the project that the association is trying to accomplish, and obviously to get them the funds that they need. The great news is Bank United is putting a large emphasis on HOA lending. We have made the necessary procedural changes to make sure that we're competitive in this space, and I'm here to assist. If you guys look at the flyer sitting outside of the door, you can find my contact information if you have any additional questions after. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Clara Diaz-Leal, proud Surfside resident for the last 17 years. I'm incredibly involved in our community. So for me, this is a point of passion to make sure that our community is prepared to deal the worst possible, but also with the best yet to come and opportunities for each condo. On my real job, I've been in this business over 40 years, and I have the pleasure of being the market president for Bank United. Bank United is a $36 billion total assets. It is the largest Florida-based bank. We're right here, homegrown out of Miami Lakes. And we do have specialty groups I happen to run the branch network. I have 17 branches as well as business banking. What that means for you guys is that you have resources. I'm really not here for the bank. I'm here for you. I'm here to answer questions about what you need. As a resource, I have pricing authority. As a resource, I can go see the condo board. As a resource, we can go to your meeting. We can help you navigate what you need in the form of financials. We work with engineers. We work with the contractors. So from a resource perspective, that's why we're here, so that you can get to navigate things that you might not really understand. This is all new. And in many cases, you've never had to do this. So that's why we're here today. Of course, I'm available, my cell phone, whatever you need. And of course, I'm here at every meeting. And I'm hoping that today you take away some tools and a path, right, to get it right. So thanks for coming.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm Senator Jennifer Bradley. I represent Senate 5, which indicated it is largely district. I represent 11 rural counties across. I live right by the St. Johns River, but my district does not have a lot of condos in my district. But in the Florida Senate, I chair the Affairs Committee. That charged with construction, all of those that why we're here today. Started looking at this immediately after tragedy, which residential disaster in our country. It was clear that there was more than inspections that needed to be tackled. The problem was much bigger than that. Groups across the state about owners really flying blind, not knowing the condition of their, not knowing their finances. So it was clear that to adequately address several reforms, condo laws, not adequate. So we tackled that from our milestone inspection, really overhauling transparency, power back in the owners, also trying to address financial health issues of condos, financial problems, structure. So forward to the dialogue and discussion.
Jim McGinnis, building official, floodplain manager for the town of Surfside. First, I want to thank Senator Pizzo and Senator Bradley and the officers from Bank United for coming here and attending at this very important forum for this historic legislation. As a Florida native and resident of Surfside, this has deep personal and professional meaning to me, this legislation. I was here 60 days and the collapse happened, the worst tragedy in building construction in the state of Florida's history. I live 1 block from ground zero in a condo. So most important people here are you people in the audience who we are here to protect, and we are here to make sure this never, ever happens again. And that's what this historic legislation is all about. It's huge. I want to thank the senators for their passion in Tallahassee for pushing it through. And I also want to thank the building officials in Miami-Dade County for joining with us to push it up to the association, to the Board of Rules of Appeals, to Miami-Dade Board of County Commissioners, and getting the law enacted here. And if you want guidance and protocols, it's in the Miami-Dade. And we're very proud of what we do here in Miami-Dade. We have the strictest protocols in the entire state, and we're here to protect you. And I want to thank you for being here to learn about this historic legislation, which was a tribute and a very appropriate response to a building that fell at 39 years of age. Thank you.
Mr. Kilsheimer? You're on mute, sir.
This is Alan Kilsheimer. I think you guys, a lot of you know it. We know a lot of you from down there. My experience prior to the tragedy investigation is 60 years of structural engineering and 54 years of investigating building failures all over the country and other parts of the world. We, as most of you know, have been down there since the day the afternoon the building collapsed. And Surfside has become my second home for a while. And I promised all of you that we will find out why the building collapsed, which we are doing. It is a challenging situation for lots of reasons, but we put together a list July 4th of last year for Jim McGinnis, who issued it to a number of the condos along the ocean in Surfside, that listed the kinds of investigations and how they should be done. I am here, I think, to answer any questions about the kinds of investigations that you do. I know they cost a lot of money, and I understand even worse than that is the money that it costs to do what is found. I live in a house, so I can't feel that particular pain, but I can tell you that I believe it's my personal responsibility to make sure that you all look at all the things that have to be looked at when you ask me to give you my understanding. So I'm here to answer any questions anybody has. Thank you.
Excellent. So again, like I said, we're here to listen. So if you're ever comfortable firing away with questions, and then as we go along, we can expand on a particular question. Is Kayla Francis, one of my legislative aides, here to hand you a microphone if you feel comfortable speaking. You have speaker cards? Okay. You have a And if I'll read out the question. The Patient Management Office. Question, why, you can raise your hand if you want to be identified for asking the question. If you don't, then let it go. Why are weight load calculations not being required? Do you want to take credit for that question or no? Okay. You don't have to. Very good question. So there's two, and then Senator Bradley can obviously expand on this as well. There was a House bill and there was a Senate bill. And some of the incongruency or what kind of held it up for a while was in fact the ability that it's a lower threshold percentage to solve an entire condominium than it is to get people, not to allow them to waive reserves at all. Sort of seems sort of incompatible. The second section that Senator Bradley and I are paying particular interest to, and we believe, I think is going to be, is that which is considered structural. It needs to be more specific, and I think Mr. Kilsheimer can speak to this too if you've seen the new bill language on what's considered structural and what's not. I think there are a couple things that need to be added, and I think there's a couple things that need to be some of the things I find to be more cosmetic than actually structural. This is an excellent suggestion that I think one that would be included.
If I could add,
yeah, go ahead.
If I could add to that, one of the complications is that there are things that some people consider cosmetic that don't affect the entire structural capacity of the building. But if there's a piece of concrete on your balcony that is loose and it's 4 inches square and it falls off and it's concrete, if it hits you in the head if you're walking on the ground, you think that's an issue. So I think there has to be some very clear, better definitions of what's structural and cosmetic. Cosmetic to me is if the paint's peeling, not if the concrete has a little spall. So I think that has to be expanded further.
Right. So in the structural integrity reserve study section of the bill, for instance, it lists and enumerates under subsection H waterproofing and exterior painting. Now, I consider certain elastomeric paint applications to be vapor barriers and to prevent water intrusion, but I just don't want it to be a catch-all painting, and then money is spent where it should be otherwise better spent or more efficiently or structurally spent, as opposed to something that is in fact cosmetic. Yeah.
That's why I'm curious about the wage, because like I said, I was the property manager there, and I was there through the whole investigative phase. So
Yeah,
that's why I'm curious.
Senator, if I could talk to him.
In the bill as it passed, you had the milestone inspection bill, which section 550. Then you also had the house structure study, that special. In the milestone inspection bill, we charge the Florida Building everything that's in that inspection. What is considered structural? The Florida legislature are not structural. Florida Building Commission back but really parsing out of what is structural. That's why it's not a static product. Not no bill is, and we're going to continue back and address. Those are the kind of back and address. We have guidance. Have to get those structural elements right. I'm not convinced every item on that list. Not incorrect, but I want to make sure that it is it reflects what needs to be there. And so that is a work in progress. Have the report.
Okay, one of the biggest reasons I bring it up is you think about some of these buildings that are 40 years old. When they were designed, it was with carpet and plastic laminates. What do? You go in, you remodel, you put in marble. You're increasing a lot of weight.
I absolutely agree with you. In fact, there's I wouldn't say a competing, but somewhat conflicting section of the same statute and section that speaks a little differently on enumerations. I'm completely with you and understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree with you. So
Same thing with design
you got the
versus
best
unit.
you got the best answer you possibly could, which is the two legislators that will be redrafting and tweaking things. Agree with you. All right,
Senator, if I could add.
yeah, go ahead.
I'd also like to direct your attention, Mr. Smith, to the new protocols by Miami-Dade. The new protocols are much stricter and much stronger than the prior recertification standards, both structurally and electrically. They require a structural engineer is required, and electrical engineer is required for all threshold buildings. And I have the link and the printout from the website to direct your attention and everyone's attention here that gives the checklists that they're required to use. And they're much, much stronger, and they're ratcheted down. For instance, electrically, they've got to use thermography now for electrical inspection certification. It's much stronger. Miami, we have the strongest in the state because we've been doing it here a while. Now we've even ratcheted down even further on that. And I'm confident that we'll see this reflected in the state bill as well going down forward. I have that up here if anyone should care for that handout. Thank you.
Senator Bradley, you want to read this one?
The question is, how will inspection requirements change in regard to the 40-year inspection and also required results? I read that building inspections, budgets, condo docs, et cetera, must be kept online beginning February 20. Correct. And the second of that question, with regard to that goes to transparency. Condo owners, inspections were done, and there was no requirement that of addition of the budget document records is always a big issue that comes up with regard to condos. So both for buyers, renters, and existing owners, if the website that they're required to have, if that threshold, all these documents are going to need to be on the website. Owners can access them. If not, they have to have a copy of. Yes, and there's a 15-year retention on both the inspection and the structure. Transparency was.
And what I had filed bills for 3 years in a row before, and it spoke to transparency. Existing statute had a unit count of 150 units or more, or an association level that takes in funds in excess of $100,000, $50,000. Champlain was 136 units. And we have a lot of sort of peak sub 150. And we all know and familiar with the drama between having to be the building manager and having to deal with residents, or residents having to deal with the building manager and trying to get access to records. And if I can log into NASA website and see great particularity a crevice in Mars right now, I think you should be able to see your condo docs and the financials and all of those things as well. Do it with your credit cards, with your cell phone, with everything else. You can have an Amazon delivery here by the end of the meeting. And I've been pushing this for years. This is the most tragic I told you so on the production of records. Condo owners are not supposed to be considered, nor are board members supposed to be considered sophisticated as it relates to the operation of, that's Mr. Kilsheimer's job and Mr. McGinnis's job and financing jobs from Ms. Leal. So, and I've said this over and over, and you understand and appreciate it, it's the decision you made, that you get a huge benefit by being able to have economies of scale and purchasing power by splitting responsibility, but you also get the burden sometimes of having to live with others and incur those expenses. But for too long, association fees have been artificially suppressed. And it's kind of like middle school student government associations, I like to say, where you just want to get reelected. So you kind of keep it as skimped as possible. Hundreds of my constituents, even grabbing my wife in the aisle at the supermarket, are like, my association fee went from X to X plus plus. But if it's been X for 9 straight years, when the cost of bread, milk, gas, flights, and hotel rooms have gone up, and that stayed static, you have sacrificed something. Your board, meaning well perhaps, but not fiscally responsible, may have meant well, but to your detriment. One dynamic that you have to understand, and this is really, really important, and we're going to push like crazy, and Senator Bradley is committed to it, but like I mentioned, I'm the only one that lives in a condo of 40 senators. And so the mindset of most of the people that I serve with, understandably, is that they live in a single-family detached house. And no one's ever going to tell them how much they're required to put in a savings account that they never touch, get no return on, and can't do anything with, and have no say. It's a get out of here, go pound sand. That's effectively and essentially what the state's doing and mandating that you all do, because on a balancing test, the balancing act between your life safety and your autonomous, ability to live and control your own destiny, the state is now stepping in to say that there is a greater concern for life safety. It's also financial safety. A lot of these places are just not run well at all, okay? And you kind of forget about it to some extent because you're not there with the books and the checkbook every day, and trying to get that information has been nearly impossible. I know for hundreds of my constituents that email me before Champlain happened. So just be mindful of that. Transparency is what it's about. There are a number of companies that have started up, one here locally, ONR, that we're going to see today, actually. Everything's on the phone. Everything on the phone. You can see everything, which I think is the way to go, okay? And then it sort of begs the question, instead of I can't find it, when someone opens up a room full of documents and boxes and they go, yeah, it's in there somewhere. No, if it's not there, then it's conspicuously absent.
The first, just to go back to the first part of the question, with regard to the year inspection and the required reserve. This bill says that if you are 3 stories or more and you are within the age of the condo years, then at 30 years you need to have that milestone inspection, and then every 10 years after. Unless you're within 3 miles of much. And in that case, it's 25 years and every 10 years after. Not preempt local governments. In fact, we direct in the bill that counties play a role in fleshing out timelines. And so that will be
Mr. Kilsheimer, a question for you. As you investigate the true cause of the Champlain Tower collapse, do you see any issues with the new developments that build subterranean garages at a deeper level on the property line that is adjacent to an older existing building? And what cautions would you recommend until the true cause of the building collapses?
As I've said many times, I'm not going to offer any information about where we are and what we found out so far until we're done. But the bottom line is that whenever you're building a building next to another building, the building that's being constructed needs to evaluate potentially the impact that it could have on the adjacent building, because oversimplified, they're liable for any damages. Usually, there's a pre-construction conference done. The developer, the new building will go into the old building with their approval, do a full review of it, sometimes do a structural review of it if they think it's necessary, so they understand the condition of the older building when the newer building starts. And then they go into the old building once a month or something, or when somebody notices in the old building a crack that got bigger or wider or longer, or a new crack. I mean, that happened after Champlain South. there were some things in Champlain East that somebody wanted to look at kind of right away. And that was done by the town that having me look at it. So the issue is, the older building can look at what the new building's doing. We always recommend that the old building receive from the new building the supportive excavation drawings. That means how they're holding up the perimeter while they're digging their basement, how they're gonna dig the basement, how they're gonna install whatever the foundations are, how they're gonna do the dewatering that may be necessary to do that, and have seismographs put up on the perimeter to understand vibrations. Those are the major parts that you have to think about when you're building a building next to any building, whether it's an old building or not, doesn't make any difference. Each condo needs to try to understand what the structure of their building is. I know in the 8 or 9 buildings that we were asked to look at so far in Surfside, the drawings that they had that they could find didn't explain all the structure of the building. So each condo needs to make sure they have drawings and they find drawings of their original building and any modifications that were made to it. And then if they have an engineer that they hire to kind of review what's going on, that structural engineer that has a minimum 5 or 10 years experience in doing this kind of stuff would be able to look at it and say, by the way, when they're doing this kind of thing, I think we have to talk about that a little more. So the requirement here is competent, experienced structural engineers in evaluating existing buildings and understanding the construction of new buildings is what's needed. And then the breakdown of all the details is something that Jim McGinnis was talking about in that list that we put together.
Thank you. McGinnis, you have a question? Then we're going to go to question.
Thank you, Senator. The question I have, question number 8, is regarding permit fees. Question is, how are permit fees calculated for concrete restoration versus new construction? Be it new construction, concrete restoration, or remodel, all the permit fees are calculated the same way, based upon the value of the construction. They're equally charged, permit fees. And the next question is, if they are evaluated the same, are older buildings paying more? The answer is no, once again, because it goes down to the value of the construction, and it's really a factor of how much repairs need to be being done. Of course, the better maintained buildings are going to need less repairs. Those that have been neglected are going to need more repairs. And there's things about rust accelerates. Degradation and deterioration is not a straight line thing. It's an exponential decay. And the larger the crack gets, the faster it grows. So on a second card, number 9.
But Mr. McGinnis, maybe the commission would take a look at some of the fees are minimus to the town, and we're trying to encourage renovations, rehabilitations, and things like that. Maybe the town would, I don't want him to answer because it would be a sunshine violation right now, but might consider, most favored nation status to those that are looking in earnest and in good faith forward with.
Yes. And
renovations.
Another question was, should these fees be waived or incentivized? Of course, that may be an excellent thing for town commission to anticipate or discuss. That's at the town commission level right there. But regardless, the repairs must be made. A big takeaway from this building official tonight is you can't kick it down the road anymore. We've got to deal with it. We're going to open up the can and deal with it. Kicking it down the road is not an option, period. My next question is, should new developments be required to provide restoration bonds in addition to impact fees or voluntary proffers to protect the community from the environmental impacts of their construction project? Once again, it's more of a town commission decision and consideration there we brought up. However, a few months ago, we adopted a very comprehensive construction sites safety ordinance, which has been excellent, and we've already issued our first demo permit underneath that, and monitoring of neighboring buildings with seismographs, with engineered studies. We actually do crack monitoring on all buildings before, during, and after any types of neighboring demolition work. This was a very comprehensive legislation, which the author of these questions was critical in developing, which we really value, and we've already putting it into place very successfully. So once again, for Town Commission, thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead. On the bank question.
All right. Okay, so we have a question regarding minimizing financial burden on residents. What is the longest term financing so assessments can be stretched out over years and board can offer residents options to pay over time, interest, etc.? Really great question. There are almost two answers to that. It starts with it depends. It depends on, I could probably scream. Can you hear me now? Okay. All legal. So it depends because it depends on the amount, right? So if you have a minor thing that you need to accomplish, you don't necessarily want to stretch that out very long. As opposed to a house where you control everything. Talk about the beautiful thing where you can share the space and you share cost, but you also share burdens. And so there are a lot of changes that can happen in a condo. A lot of people coming in, a lot of rentals, some people default, just different life occurrences. Because of that, you don't want to stretch your terms out long. For the most part, they tend to be about 10 years. They can be 4 years, be 6 years, can do 7 years. And for the bigger sort of buckets, we could run 10 years. Anything after that, we have to really sit down because we're in it with you, right? The lender is part of this deal. The other important thing is you can have more than one assessment running at different times. You can start because you want to change the elevator and it's $2 million, right? Because you have 2 of them, and we can do an assessment for that. And then you're still working on your structural, you're working on other things, and you come back with pool resurfacing, and that's going to cost you X. Then you can do an assessment for that so that the burden can be spread over time. I think it's really scary when you think you have to do it all at once, and you just can't afford it. And you're scared that you won't be able to meet that. So there are different ways to do this, and the cost, we're still able to bring in rates, because you just said something about interest. Rates are going up. Rates are going up a lot. They've gone up several times this year. We can still get right under 5%. For that, we can work on that. That's really not, that shouldn't be your main concern. So no, so when you do an assessment that backs into, that's a good question. So generally your question was cash flow needs. So buildings like this are not for profit. And Milton can speak to that very directly because he does the cash flows. So I think that's important if you would share what you look at from a financial perspective.
When it comes to HOAs, the cash flow analysis is fairly simple. It's based on the special assessment. The amount is going to be based on special assessment. Reference to Bank United loan, other financial same cash flow analysis, but simple answer to the question that Clara read is 10 years. That is the max term that we're able to do at Bank United. Some other institutions that are able to extend it to, but it also depends on the project. For example, if you're replacing the roof, life, some of these roofs are 12 to 10 years, 10 to 12 years. Why would you get a loan for 20 years, 5, 10, and 12? That means that chances are you're going to need another loan while you're still paying for the whole. So again, simple answer is 10 years at Bank United. Cash flow is going to be based on specialists.
That makes sense? Generally, just to be clear, you'll say, I have this elevator, I need to replace it, $2 million. You back into how many units you have, decide on the special assessment dollar amount that's going to pay for that debt, and that's what we look at. If that amount matches our payment, we're great. So that's the cash flow. It's very simple.
Now, when I mentioned that we didn't file anything or pass anything, the intention or with the design to disrupt, place anybody from their home, where the legislature needs to get more creative. And luckily, your state senator, I'm here till November, has signed the front of a paycheck before he signed the back of a paycheck growing up. So I understand finance even better than I did the law before I went to law school. Seated in the sort of quasi third row is a gentleman in the center. His name is Louis Orloff, who's been nagging me for a few years, and I filed a bill to allow for very conservative investment of reserves, so you get some sort of return. Got to be a certified financial advisor. It's, you know, completely kosher and guarded by a third party, a financial advisor. Because if you're talking about several hundred units and several millions of dollars, that's earning zero that you guys can't touch, and it is a 5 to 10 year sort of, you know, push out or reserve. That's serious money on a return. And that met with some pushback, I think, the first year we filed it. Then it had some success in the Senate. And now I think everyone's going to be amenable to revisit it. Because that's a huge situation right there. Here's the other thing. You don't see it so much in Surfside, but one of the things that I very concerned about and campaigned on was, you know, we have 100,000 septic tanks still in Miami-Dade County. Okay, so I don't care how beautiful and gorgeous some of these buildings and houses are, they're still flushing their toilets into 65-year-old broken clay pipes. Okay, because we don't have gravity and we need pump stations. It's literally like sucking through a broken straw. It's very strange, very awful. And I remember when Mayor Cava was Commissioner Cava running, and she says, "Can I have your endorsement?" I said, "Yes, if you commit to the rip-up, repair, and replacement of septic sewer systems for sanitary sewer." She goes, "Absolutely." Here's what my idea was. It's like an average cost of about $36,000 per single-family house to have a septic tank removed and have a tie into sanitary sewer. Okay, you have an 80-year-old widow living in a house. She doesn't have $36,000. You know what she does have? She has equity in her house that I'm not looking to touch now, but should there be a future sale, whether by devising inheritance or sale or transaction, then that lien could be satisfied. Does that make sense, everybody? There is equity. There may not be cash or cash flow, but there is equity in a lot of these units, and your life is more important than how much you got in your pocket right now. To me, it is especially. But I want to be mindful of a couple things. Every single year in the legislature, I was told, and it was rumored, and it became true, someone files a bill for the retrofitting installation of wet sprinkler systems in buildings, right? Every year it comes up. And the Senate sponsor, Ed, great guy, I love him, he said, "Senator Pizzo, I know you don't want to be the one that votes against a bill, and then all of a sudden an elderly widow in an apartment or a condominium dies in a fire." I said, "No, I don't, but I also don't want to be the senator who votes for a bill that special assessment will displace 12,000 of those grandmothers. So here's what I'm willing to do. I'll go shop out the idea to some underwriters. And if the actuaries at the insurance companies come back and say that the installation of a wet sprinkler system mitigates injury, property loss, and death, I'm on board as long as it's commensurate with an offset that sort of pays for the assessment." Does that make sense? Everybody came back with it's de minimis. So they realized that's vendor driven. That the actuaries who do this for a living, the science behind it, did not find a huge correlation between mitigating injury or property loss with the installation of wet sprinkler systems. In fact, some came back that'd be more expensive because you're going to saturate an entire building, you know, just because some kid's smoking a joint in the stairwell. Okay, seriously. So that's sort of an idea. Now, single-family homes have like the Y Green PACE program. Low-interest loans that actually in front of a mortgage, but obviously still subordinate to property taxes. That's another idea. That's available to single-family homeowners. They can do their roofs, their windows, all that stuff. Commissioner Rosen, Vice Mayor Rosen, that's what I'm talking about. I think condo buildings should have the same thing. Should have the same luxury. Also, and I was just texting before, Charlie Crist has resigned today from Congress, but he filed a bill, HR 8304, that's co-sponsored by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who I texted on the way here saying, "What's the status of 8304? It is also a companion low-interest condo financing renovation structural loan program. The banks are going to have to get creative with us. They don't want to piss us off. We have really big Twitter accounts. I'm being serious. And I have to hand it to banks and to a lot of insurance companies who right away said, yes, whatever you need. Remember, I had a lot of resident survivors and next of kin who were concerned that when you subrogate your rights in your insurance policies, that they're basically, the insurance company is getting the money first before you do, and everybody agreed to give the money to to families and to residents first, which was huge. Even the auto insurance companies, especially. Valley National Bank, were I think their oldest customer in New Jersey. They actually had the assessment on the building. They immediately, the same day, mutually agreed to terminate that and return the closing costs. Banks need to get creative on these issues. There is equity in the building, and it's not you should not worry about what's in your checking account right now as to whether or not it's going to be paid for. Senator Bradley?
And just to piggyback off of what you were just describing, I mean, certainly there's as condos try to budgets. The vision for the bill is that when you get that and we look down the longer term, and you have residents who have seen their inspection and they haven't been waiving because they understand the seriousness of the structural problem, properly kept, that we look down the road for special. So yes, in the short term, there's going to be native financial look at that gap, but there's a long-term benefit that I think ability then certainly that we have now. Next question: why did condos of 2 stories not get new recertification? What is the law for them? Several Art Deco 2-story buildings in Miami Beach, where some apparently are not in good shape. And the simple answer is it's a balancing act. I mean, we had to draw the line. It was, concern was vertical and high rise. Line at 3. Originally, there were some back and forth over 3 over and so as to address the various safety concerns, but not so many that under the bill. So it was a balance.
Senator Bradley gives a much more diplomatic and political answer than I would. So those 2-story buildings, if you have concern about where they are and they need some additional life safety stuff, that's fine. Really, the gauge is, can you jump and live? And that's really what it came down to. Can you jump and live? And that's really where the decision is made. Sir, do you have
Okay. Hello. Okay, I have a question. I've been in the real estate business for over 40 years selling.
Are you Randy Rose?
Yes, I am. So what I am concerned about is what the legislation is going to do to handle the condominiums, over 1 million of them, in Florida, and we'll worry about the rest of the United States later. We don't have reserves. So now all of a sudden we have a roof that needs to be replaced, and let's just say it was $1 million, and there's only 2 years left on it. So there's going to be, could be a huge assessment and a special assessment. We have different kinds of assessments. Maintenance is we call it maintenance, people call it an assessment. So I'm talking about special assessments. How do we handle the reserves? I hope the legislation will probably come up with a percentage of maybe the budget. If you have a $100,000 budget or you have $1 million budget, that maybe you would take 10 or 15%, work that out over a period of time, versus all of a sudden saying, wow, you hire somebody, a management company, to do an analysis, and they go, your seawall alone is $5 million. There's 2 years left on it. Your roof was $1 million versus having a newer building that did collect for assessments. So my concern is what the legislation is going to do for all these property owners today that are living in condominiums that don't have enough in reserves and haven't been collecting in reserves, and how we're going to be moving forward, because this is a question that everybody is asking.
Sure.
And I don't have the answer, and I'm not going to give an answer. Thank you.
So conspicuously absent, great question. Conspicuously absent, and I see Mr. Price kind of jump a little bit. I want to segue to them and lending. Conspicuously absent are apartment buildings, which can be 10, 15, 20, 30 stories. The reason is Bank United's division that lends to developer owners, right, to landlords, have reserve requirements built into that loan schedule. So when they do a 15, 30-year, so my family up in the Northeast owns thousands of apartments, thousands of them. we over-reserve, just what my dad was like in a, apocalyptic doom and gloom kind of scenario. So we had reserves probably for a couple of years, on not receiving on rents, but we overly reserve, and it has to satisfy the lending requirements that the bank has when they put out a 15 or up to 30-year, fixed long-term loan with a landlord that might own. So you can have two identical buildings. Randy, you know this better than anybody. You can have two identical buildings, right? 200 unit building A, 200 unit building B. B is a condo, A is an apartment building. This single owner of 200 units has very strict lending requirements and conditions of their loan, which include percentages of reserves which cannot be waived. The condos are 200 people going it alone. Like Senator Brandis jokes like autonomous Somali warlords, just sort of going it alone. So apartments are not in here because there is an economic incentive for the owner, the landlord, to make necessary repairs on the useful life of appliances and cosmetics, get the highest market rent for profit. Over here is very often lowest cost provider, right? Like Steve Buscemi's joke, like
You have the homeowners
Yeah.
that fight against reserves,
understood.
and that's the reality. The board, but you have good property managers that want to start setting budgets. I can give an example. One building that I own, and my maintenance is $750. They did an analysis, and they said, "Wow, if we did an amortization, like I said, for the seawall and everything else without life expectancy, your maintenance go to $3,000 a month." So, and it doesn't really matter whether
But
it's
Randy, let me just stop you there. Had they started this 10 years ago in a fiscally responsible
no, this
manner,
is what's happened in today's world. Yes, we understand that unfortunately in the real life situation is, like you say about being reelected on the board and different things, people want to have reserves. A lot of people don't, but now when you have an older building, which a lot of them are in existence, is that we have to start the reserves. But my question is, which I'm 100% for reserves, but it's the legislation. They're the ones going to make the law. So if all of a sudden you say I have a seawall that needs $5 million worth of work in 2 years, that association, the people are in trouble, and it doesn't matter whether it's a $200,000 condo or $1 million condo. There's issues about coming up with the money. So I can understand is that we're going to have special assessments to start working on
Right.
that, but we have to have the special assessments for reserve collecting, and it's going to be up to legislation to determine exactly as percentage-wise of possibly whatever each building's budget is. That was my point.
right, which is an excellent question, and not to seem insensitive, but when you're using by way of example, the cost of a seawall that has 2 years of useful life left on it, and you say it's what, $5 million? You say it was?
I'm just giving an example.
Yeah, let's
yes.
use an example of $5 million. It's a $5 million seawall repair that has gone many years without maintenance whatsoever. The failing of that seawall that may lead to a complete collapse of the building is going to be the cost of that, of the loss of life and the loss of the entire building, is far in excess of the $5 million. That's the position that my colleagues take, which is, I know it stings, I know it's painful, but if it's viable and you have equity and you have the resources, then go do it. Because what we don't want is for people to continue to waive things because they're really, really expensive at $5 million and lose a $200 million building and 98 lives. That's where we are. And this is no different analogous to, and I appreciate more than any of my colleagues do, I know, because I was here every single day except for one. Okay, Thursday, July 1st, when the president came, I figured no one was going to miss me, so I went to go see my dad for his birthday. Okay, the only day I wasn't here for less than 18 hours.
Yeah, we appreciate all the time you spent.
But it's just in me to do it, and it could have happened where I live. My point is, if you smoke for 40 years, if you eat like crap for 40 years, you're going to get some really bad news when you go to the doctor. Okay? Preventative medicine and I get it, but that's where we are now, and I get it, and I don't want to displace anybody. It's not politically, this is suicide for me. I get it, but I'm okay with it because people will be safer. We need to bend over backwards to be accommodating and creative as possible on the financing aspect of it. But those benefits that you get by splitting the responsibility, your pool is 10 times the size that it would be if it was in your own single-family backyard. Okay? The amenities are a lot nicer than it would be in your own single-family home that you would have to bear the entire burden and cost of. But in exchange for that, you have a benefit and you have a burden, okay? And a lot of people and a lot of boards were asleep at the switch for a long time, and they did so. Their fiscal irresponsibility has tragically resulted in the loss of life. It used to just be the loss of funds.
Well,
The other problem, Randy, that we have here is, and you know this because you've been selling real estate for a long time, we don't have much of a legacy interest in South Florida, which means things are not built for grandchildren. We don't do that with business. We don't apprentice kids and nieces and nephews, and we don't build things that we expect to last for 3 and 4 generations. And Mr. Kilsheimer can speak to this when he gets off his call. You have to understand this. When Harbor K in March 27th, 1981, on North Atlantic Avenue in Cocoa Beach collapsed, and almost immediately, it was sort of like the NIST of that time, came out with a 150-page report that basically said that condos are a 50, 60-year phenomenon. They're not actually supposed to last 100 years. They're not. And people treat a lot of times condos like rental cars, okay, or hotel rooms. You use more towels, you put the air conditioning down lower, right, and you have less concern and consideration. That's how it is. Compounding that problem is geography. 2 identical cars built at the exact same time 50 years ago in Detroit on the line, if one is kept in a garage in Arizona and one is kept in a garage in Surfside, you should expect to age that car in dog years, because it's going to have accelerated corrosive environmental issues that the place in a dry, arid climate's not. And that's where we are. It does become a balancing act of, is it worth to fix it? Is it worth to replace it? It is analogous and really no different, just obviously on a much larger scale, no different than a car or any other asset that you have, to whether or not it's worth to repair it or to fix it, which include conditions like, can I afford it? Is it academically worth it? Intellectually worth it? Really, is it a sound investment to make? Sometimes it's not. Bank question. Okay.
Camera. I was told that somebody asked me a question and I must have been on mute. I apologize. If you want to ask the question again, I'll try and answer it.
Randy, do you want to? Yeah. Gotcha. And I will tell you that I remember speaking about with Senator Bradley, my principal concern are buildings built between 72 and 89. That's where I am. Right? 2 things. And I remember Mayor Cava looked at me like I was, like, what am I talking about? When the microphones got shoved in our faces, they're like, what are you looking for, Senator? What needs to change? I said, risk needs to be priced accordingly, because it hasn't. You'll remember about a week and a half after Crestview over in North Miami Beach was evacuated, okay? And when I finally got a hold of their insurance policy, everything was excluded except a meteor literally from a particular galaxy. I'm not kidding. And those people found themselves in a very weird situation because their building was basically evacuated and considered uninhabitable and should be demolished. They didn't own the property. It was on a land lease. So when people are saying, Senator, I worked for 29 years, I paid this off, I got my piece of the American dream, you're telling me I have nothing? And I go, well, we're not going to let that happen. But yes, they would have you believe that you have nothing right. And that's, now, that guy worked so hard to get what he got, and he handed over a lot of the responsibility to the board and to management, people that were licensed to do it, people that volunteered to do it. And so that's why we call those people sort of unsophisticated, but I'm not saying he's an unsophisticated person, just as it relates to that. That guy had no idea that he didn't own the land underneath the building, that it was on a land lease for 99 years to a Bahamian entity. And the insurance in the building didn't cover any of it because they tried to keep the association fees so low that they accepted exclusions every year, and the insurance agent wants that premium renewed every year because they get their cut. 728.111 subsection, I think it's 11F, requires that, or in 122, requires that buildings be reappraised by insurance companies every 36 months. Do you think Champlain Towers was reassessed every 36 months if the total coverage was $31 million? Absolutely not. And we need teeth to enforce that.
There's a bank question. if associations were to hold liens on units, would the bank consider value of the liens as collateral? So when we do extend loans to HOAs, we do not do it on a unit basis. Our assessment is our collateral. So first of all, it saves you a lot of money because we're not getting appraisals and we're not getting all this other stuff that you may need in a traditional credit facility. We just ensure that the budget is there, that you have a specific assessment for this expense, and then we have that as our collateral. It is not real estate related. That's why we ensure that there's an assessment, because it's not real estate related for us. There are too many moving parts, and these are common areas for the most part, right? So that's really the simple answer. People need individual loans. That's a different story. At a personal level, that they have to go do whatever it is that they want to do to pay off, in cash their assessments, and people do that. That's just different.
Because of not having paid assessments or whatever, would you consider the value? I know this isn't a valuation question. Would you consider the value to be? Would you consider that lien as a negative, so the value is only $400,000?
So first and foremost, let me say that I run a commercial bank, and that's a residential question because it's an individual borrowing. So they're really different rules. But when I used to do residential, you have to look at the quality of the building. So if the building has a lot of foreclosure, if the building has a lot of vacancies, if the building has a lot of debt, if the building has a lot of problems, that bank may not extend credit. So that's a different story, right? So that you're saying the premise that you're already in trouble. That's a very different and ugly story. And I think that's a responsibility that the center has spoken about taking on at a different level. Just like we talk about the unsophisticated possible board, I think what you've done is you've brought it to light that it needs to be managed and monitored by a higher authority. And as a state, we hadn't done that. So people will do generally what you allow them to do. Sometimes not so good.
There are three very similarly worded questions. I'm going to read this one because the last name is Bizzo? Beth Bizzo? It says Beth Bizzo. Who, if anyone, is advocating for the owners in Florida who will not be able to afford these costs and will possibly be homeless? Me. Again, this is not the intention. And I have not seen it. We've dealt with everything you can imagine with Champlain. And we've gotten people mortgages through banks, relocation assistance. I've co-signed on applications for rentals. I mean, there's not, I have yet to say no to anybody. Okay, so if there's equity in the building, and I don't disagree with what you said about the financial viability is what you meant, not the quality of the structure, but of the operation of the building, because some of these are often done by design. We do have pocket areas a lot in South Dade where developers are coming in and gobbling up units, and they are benefiting off the promotion of the idea that everyone is screwed because they're going to go bankrupt having to make these assessments. And so like, oh, I need to sell before I'm one of 100 people selling. Let me sell now, right? Let me tell you else, this is very important. The assumption is that if you have a board member in a building of a couple hundred units with a lot of money coming in, it speaks to the sophistication idea, that they basically have an oath like the commissioners in Surfside do, or your state senators do. You put your hand on the Bible and swear to uphold the Constitution. It doesn't exist. It's a volunteer position. So if someone gets a $2 million contract to do a renovation of a lobby and common area, and all of a sudden the board president's condo is also renovated at the exact same time, that's not illegal. I think it should be. I think it absolutely should be. And none of this was like Greek to my colleagues until now they start looking into these issues, but it's what I've been pushing for for several years. There also is a concern from a lot of property managers that I hear with once we gain their trust that they make recommendations to boards all the time that fall on deaf ears. They don't want to lose their job, but they also don't want to create a safety risk for people in the building. And it's rampant. I represent the tip of South Beach, south of 5th, all the way up to Broward County, and all the way west to northwest 27th Avenue. I get it all the time. I'm told I can trust you, Senator. You know, used to be a prosecutor and deal with very sensitive witnesses and issues. I've made recommendations. I'm really scared for the safety of the building and the people in my building. What do I do? And that's what we've talked about, basically some whistleblower protection. And, you know, job security and safety, which is really important. The building managers know these places very well, and very often when you speak to them and you think that you're butting heads with them and they're dismissing you, they agree with you. But their employer has the last say, and again, has that dynamic where they want to stay in power. That makes sense. Doesn't make sense, but big one. Mr. Kilsheimer.
Yes.
So, not to be political about this, but my concern was that a lot of politicians would like, and I appreciate Surfside taking the initiative to retain you, but a lot of other politicians would like to punt on Champlain and other issues and wait for NIST. Now, I was a resident of New York during 9/11, and I remember it took 7 years, I think, for them to come back with anything. Same thing with Oklahoma City. Let me ask you, it's the best that you know, from the 1.6 million condos there are in Florida, how many structural engineers do you think are licensed in the state of Florida that are qualified to do this work?
Probably a low number. There are lots of, you know, to be a registered engineer in Florida and many other states, you have to pass an exam, but you pass an exam in the state you first took it in. You know, I passed the exam. That doesn't mean I know what I'm doing. Now, that was 60 years ago, and there were 5 questions, and 3 of them were examples in the books that I was allowed to have. So, you know, I passed, but geez, did I know what I was doing? Probably not. The key here is that my guess is that if there's, say there's 1,000 engineers, structural engineers, not architects, not mechanical, plumbing, not just civil, but civil with a structural background in buildings, you're going to find not a great number of them, but more importantly, taking the responsibility and the liability of saying something is safe or not. Many people don't want to take that responsibility. So that you have a limited number of people. I couldn't tell you how many. What I can tell you is that somebody before, and I can't always hear what is being said, if a board member or a condo member believes something's really wrong and nobody's doing anything about it, the building management says to the condo board, you have to do something about it, and they don't pay attention. And the first thing you do is you go to the building official. The building official sometimes is a registered engineer. In the state of Florida and any other state that I work in, which is like 25, it is the responsibility of an engineer, if they see something safe, to go to the authority. If you go to the authority and the authority doesn't do anything about it, then your next step is to go to the politicians and the newspapers, okay? That's the only thing you can do. And that's a real problem because this is all relating to money. And that's what people don't want to spend or they don't have to spend.
Agree.
The deal is to at least know, which we generally do, is you need to do these things. But guess what? You need to do these 2 things within the next year, and that's going to cost you this much money. And the 3 things you can wait a while on, and here's how long you have to wait to do it. That takes a lot of experience to do that. But that's the way you can help with getting the money. You don't have to do all $8 million, whatever the number is at one time, necessarily. The issue is that when somebody asked before about what about newer buildings as they're being built, you always have to worry about when you're building next to another building, you have to worry about that. The newer buildings, remember, I was designing buildings in 1968 before Condo South was even designed. The rules that we had to follow then were substantially different than the rules that you have to follow today. So one of the interesting questions is the way the codes are written. If I look at a building and say it's safe, I say it's safe based on the code that it was designed under, not today's code.
Please say that again, because that's important for people to realize.
Yeah, this has to be thought through a little bit, all right? Because bringing older buildings up to today's code doesn't work. It's like, I'm 82, bringing me up to a 20-year-old isn't gonna work anymore, right? The key here is to have good judgment and to sometimes you can not repair something, but make it safe until you can repair it. And you just need to have the politicians and competent structural people talk about this. And then each board, I mean, I had a conversation the other day about if somebody wanted to set up a panel anywhere in Florida or anywhere in this country, where we talked about if you live in an apartment building or a condo building or even a house, these are the kinds of things to look for yourself. While an engineer can say the fact that this concrete has cracked isn't or is a problem, at least a resident can say the concrete's cracked and it's new and I'm watching it get bigger. And if you wanted to, you can go to a 5 and dime store, which don't exist anymore. You get plaster of Paris, and you as a resident can smear plaster of Paris across a crack. Plaster of Paris, that's 15 cents, or maybe $15, but anyhow, plaster of Paris doesn't crack. If that plaster of Paris is cracked, that's tell you it's moving. Then you go tell somebody it's moving. And the worst case is you find an engineer that maybe can't come to the site, or you can't afford to hire him, and you send a picture of what you're worried about. And if he's a competent, experienced engineer that takes his profession seriously, their profession seriously, he will look at it and say, I don't think you should worry about that, or you know what, you should worry about that, and here's the kinds of things you ought to do. There are a number of engineers in this country that are willing to do that. We see that when they go to other countries, when there's problems, to help in other countries, when there's hurricanes, earthquakes, collapses, and stuff like that. Those same guys will help out here. Okay?
Thank you.
The same guys.
Thank you. And then Mr. McGinnis is going to ask the last question. I have a few that I'm keeping, and I'm going to respond to individually and call you or contact you. Some of them are a little sensitive. I don't want to do that. I want to remind everybody as well, just the dynamic that we have in Florida. There's one agency that's in the executive branch that is responsible for Mr. McGinnis's license as a building official, Mr. Kilsheimer's license as an engineer, and the building manager. And it's all under the same agency. So there's a lot of this that goes on sometimes. It's also the same agency that licensed manicurists. No, and I don't mean to discount that as a profession whatsoever, but this is of great particularity where other states have devoted, dedicated divisions for more specialized situations. Estheticians deal with, germs and bacteria all the time, and it's very serious. And maybe that should be in the Department of Health, right? But in North Miami Beach, on January 7th of 2021, a structural engineer says via hand delivery, delivered a letter to the building official, Mr. Ozuna, in North Miami Beach that said, building is structurally unsafe, like basically vacate immediately, and electrically unsafe, vacate immediately. And the building official said, I never got this. On July 7th, they found the letter. It was stamped July 7th as being received, and then it was a he said. Come to find out that the engineer did not deliver the letter. Maybe the building manager got a copy of it. And who did the building manager tell when it's bold-faced in all caps says, get the hell out of the building now? Nobody. And that's what we're dealing with, to give that agency the resources to be able to mediate these issues as well. One of the protections, the reason why I asked Mr. Kilsheimer about engineers is we're not going to allow price gouging. There are very few structural engineers that are available. 912,000 of the 1,524,000 condos are over 30 years and will now fall into this category of mandatory inspection. So we are mindful that to protect against price gouging. McGinnis.
Thank you, Senator Pizzo. I have two questions I'd like to respond to. The first is addressed to Mr. Kilsheimer. Alan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
I couldn't hear the other gentleman.
It says, to Mr. Kilsheimer, as you investigate the true cause of the Champlain Tower South building collapse, do you see any issues with new developments that build subterranean garages at a deeper level on the property line that is adjacent to an older existing building? And what cautions would you recommend until the true cause of the building collapse is known?
The answer to that question is that you have to understand the kind of foundations that are being built. You have to understand dimensions of where things are. You have to understand about how the building's being watered. You have to understand about how the supportive excavation system is being done. All those things that I mentioned earlier. The answer to your question is we are in some stages of the investigation of Surfside Cloud South. We're almost finished. And in some cases, because of various obstacles that we're trying to overcome, we haven't started. But the end result is you have to evaluate each circumstance differently because they're not all the same. That if you have a building that has 30 feet between columns and it's 11 stories tall and it's an apartment building and it's post-tension concrete, the loads on those columns and the foundations is different than a 20-foot span building that's not post-tension, that's 11 stories tall. The people load, the live load is the same, all right? It's the weight of the building and the contents of the building that vary from building to building. So there's no general rule. We tried in July to write as close as we could, and we will be glad to take each one of those items and write a description that we think John Q. Public can understand better to help them look at each circumstance. Because in the real world, if it's one basement or two basements, the difference will be how much dewatering they have to do, how strong the supportive excavation has to be temporarily, and that's adding another floor of dead load, meaning the weight of the building to it. So you have to evaluate each one. There's no way to come up with one general rule. You need to evaluate the design of the building. That's what we're pretty much finished with on Champlain South. That's the design of the building based on the drawings that are available. It's now determining whether or not it was built per those drawings and then understanding strength of material. We have just in the last 2 weeks done a series of foundation investigations that had not yet been done while the litigation was going on. And we finished with those, we're evaluating it, but so far that they seem to be showing positive information to us, okay?
Thank you, Alan. As in closing, I have one final question as posed to the town, and it reads as follows. What will be the ultimate responsibility of the town's officials that have given the final okay to the buildings currently being built or repaired? Our ultimate responsibility is the protection of your life, health, safety, and welfare in buildings, period. That's our responsibility. That's what we're here for. And we do that through the enforcement of the Florida building codes, the rules of the American Concrete Institute, the American Steel Institute, and principles and practices of modern engineering. That's the first question. Second one, has there been any change from what it used to be? Yes. It continually evolves. These are advancing and continually upwardly evolving building sciences. That's why there's a revision of the Florida Building Code every 3 years. That's why there's a new version of the ACI and ASI handbooks every so many years, is because engineering advances. And so it is much better than it used to be. The buildings being built now are exponentially better than they used to be.
Mr. McGinnis, let me ask you this question. Would Champlain Towers be able to be built the exact same way today?
No, sir. We have new building codes that are much more advanced. That was many building codes ago.
And again, it goes back to the analogy that it's what what Allen said about you can make something safe until you get to an actual repair, or the evolution of design materials and practices, which is why I give my window of my concern. Listen, the cocaine cowboy days in Miami, building inspectors were looking the other way, taking bags of cash. Not exactly the right type of water was being mixed with concrete, okay? In that situation. However, if you're a classic car lover like I am, it might not have seatbelts, but it's still roadworthy, and for the time that it was built and the condition that it is, it's still able to be on the roadway. As far as building in and around older buildings, there are a lot of magnificent structures that have been reserved and preserved while new construction has gone around them. Whether it's Grand Central Station, IM pays, Glass Tower at the Louvre, the Four Seasons here, went around, without knocking anything down, it can be done if you don't choose the lowest cost option and you don't neglect or ignore concerns of others. Sometimes the more expensive option is obviously the best option.
If I can add something.
Go ahead, Alan.
When Jim said that the building official is responsible for the life and safety, et cetera, understand that in the state of Florida and in every other state that I've worked in, the structural engineer, when he prepares his drawings and calculations, he files them for a permit and he signs and seals them, certifying that he has designed it in accordance with the applicable building code. In addition to that, Florida now, and has for some time, as well as many other states now that never had before, requires certified inspections of the construction to certify, again, by law, that the building was built in accordance with the building permit set of drawings. Now, neither of those requirements stop somebody from maybe not doing their job properly for reasons that I'd rather not discuss, and they say it was all done right. We run into that all the time. But if the engineers know they are essentially liable. The inspectors are essentially liable. There are all kinds of court cases that prove that to the fact. The more there are that makes these people understand they are responsible for people's lives, the less people you will have that do it that don't know what they're doing, and the more people you will have in that are really trying to help. But Jim, the building officials rely on the structural engineers to sign and seal their drawings for responsibility. There's no building department in this country that we've worked with except New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles that have the money or the manpower to check the design of the structure of a building. It is not the building official's responsibility to check the design. It's the building official's responsibility to rely on a structural engineer and their best understanding. They look at drawings. If they see something really wrong, they ask questions.
Alan,
Everybody step up to the plate.
Alan, if I can, I just want to just ask the bank, for instance, do you sometimes require on large construction loans to have a third-party engineering firm, third-party consulting engineer separate and apart from the developer, monitoring all of that construction activity while it's going on? But that's, I don't know, it's a rather recent phenomenon, right? Past 20 years?
Yeah,
So,
longer, but many places don't even have it today.
So part of our underwriting, for example, if you bring a request to us, is to meet with our construction department first. They review the quality of whoever is doing your building. They review the structural plans. They review all of it. While they're not structural engineers, they do have a third party, a firm, that will attest to the fact that all this is as it should be. That gives us peace of mind. We're conservative in that fashion, but we also think we're doing you a favor. And recently, to give you an example, I had one that was fighting with us, the GC, and we're like, it's not our fault you don't want to do that. And we had a separate conversation with our client and said, do you really want to deal with someone who is fighting us on giving us this information that has your best interest at heart? And while it may cost you a few extra dollars to do this with a different person, we don't consider this a viable option. And we had to have like Zoom call after Zoom call. They decided to go with them afterwards, but they have to follow our rules. My rules protect you. My client is the condo association. It is not anyone else. And so that's a really big deal when you're seeking financing. Let people protect you and ask for the protections.
Kayla's giving me the we're out of time thing. Will you have us back? Want to continue to do this? It said, okay, we go back for committee weeks. We'll be back in November for organization session. December 12th will be our first committee week, so session starts late. We start in March this year, so committee weeks will begin. Any bills to be drafted, change, whatever. We have a lot of time. The earliest something would be signed into law would be like the middle of April if it was like a sense of urgency that passed 3 committees, and not likely. So you're looking at May, June. for a July 1st effective date. But thank you for having us. Go ahead.
All right. So
Whenever I can get Senator Bradley back down here. He spends a lot of time on the farm, but I like to get her down to the coast. Of course. Absolutely. Folks, I want to just one last thing if I can. Not about me, it's more about Senator Bradley. So not a lot of attention is paid to state politics sometimes. Meanwhile, it controls about 90% of your daily life and your destiny. Okay? The national stage gets a lot of attention. You know that you can go and wring the neck of one of your commissioners because they're super local. But most of your constitutional, economic, social, everything revolves around state policy. I'm incredibly indebted to Senator Bradley, who had the fortitude and perseverance to push through because she knew this was the right thing. We each have 555,000 constituents, okay? So the city of Miami has 400,000 people. They have 5 commissioners, so they each have 80,000 constituents. Miami-Dade County has 2.8 million people, 13 commissioners. They each have 215,000 constituents, which seems huge. We have 550,000 each. And so I'm incredibly thankful. This will be the first of 2 town halls. We'll conclude tonight probably about 9 o'clock on the aisles. But really, Senator Bradley, who will always be accessible, really deserves applause and my praise.
all right, so I just want to close out. I know Surfside has seen some terrible tragedies in the last year. But today we got to see something amazing, which was, a Democrat and a Republican sitting together at the table, working for the benefit of the constituents of Floridian everywhere. So I thank you both for coming out here today and doing this. I want to thank the rest of the people on the panel and Commissioner Maishide, who put this all together. So thank you all.
And folks, I do have highlighted sections of the Florida law, the Miami